Jr.'s reading from Edgar Allan Poe's The Cask of Amontillado. Okay, first of all, this story has a really interesting inspiration to it that I'll be sharing after you read this. And I'm not going to be reading it like this the entire time, so I promise you that I shall read it in a better way. First of all, a cask is a large barrel. Usually it stores wine, and Amontillado is a type of wine. It's a type of sweet, like a dessert wine, like a sherry, and it comes from regions in Spain. And if you think of like a big wine barrel on its side, the Cask of Amontillado, I love this story. Edgar Allan Poe, 1847. Okay, let me make sure I've got my throat cleared and we'll get started here in 1 second. Okay. The 1,000 injuries of Fortunato I had borne as best I could. But when he ventured upon insult, I vowed revenge. You, who so well know the nature of my soul, will not suppose, however, that gave utterance to a threat. In other words, I'm going to get revenge on this guy, Fortunato, but I never said anything to him that I was angry at him. At length, I would be avenged. Revenge is best served cold, right? This was a point definitively settled, but the very definitiveness with which it was resolved precluded the idea of risk. I must not only punish, but punish with impunity. In other words, I'm going to be really careful at how I get back at this guy, Fortunato, whatever he did. And I'm going to make sure that I do not get in trouble. That's what impunity means. If wrong is unredressed, that means not made right. A wrong is not made right when retribution overtakes its redresser. It is equally unredressed, unmade right, when the avenger fails to make himself felt as such to him who has done the wrong. It must be understood that neither by word nor deed had I given Fortunato cause to doubt my goodwill. I continued, as was mine to smile in his face, and he did not perceive that my to smile now was at the thought of his immolation, his destruction. So I always smiled when I talked to Fortunato. Hi, Fortunato. Hi, buddy. He had no idea that I'm going to get revenge on him. He had a weak point, this Fortunato, although, in other words, he was a man to be respected and even feared. He prided himself on his connoisseurship, meaning having a very fine, refined understanding of something, in this case, in wine. Few Italians have the true virtuoso spirit. For the most part, their enthusiasm is adopted to suit the time and opportunity, to practice imposture upon the British and Australian millionaires. In painting and gemmery, Fortunato, like his countrymen, was a quack. But in the matter of old wines, he was sincere. In this respect, I did not differ from him materially. I was skillful in the Italian vintages myself, and bought largely whenever I could. It was about dusk one evening, during the supreme madness of the carnival season, that I encountered my friend. So he's saying here that he knew wines pretty well too, and so did Fortunato. It was one of the things that they were very smart about, both of these guys, and apparently they're quite wealthy. And it's carnival season, so there's celebration and drinking going on here in Italy, where this is set, even though obviously Poe was not Italian. Fortunato accosted me with excessive warmth, for he had been drinking too much. The man wore motley, meaning like just his crazy outfit. He had on a tight-fitting party-striped dress, and his head was surmounted, by the conical cap and bells. I was so pleased to see him that I thought I should never have done wringing his hand. Hey, nice to see you, Fortunato, great guy. I said to him, my dear Fortunato, you are luckily met. How remarkably well you are looking today. But I had received a pipe of what passes for Amontillado, and I have my doubts. In other words, he's saying to his buddy Fortunato, hey, I got my hands on some stuff that claims to be Amontillado, but I don't know if it really is. I need to use your expertise to help me. How? Said he. Amontillado, a pipe. Impossible. And in the middle of carnival? I have my doubts, I replied, and I was silly enough to pay the full Amontillado price without consulting you in the matter. You were not to be found, and I was fearful of losing a bargain. Amontillado! I have my doubts. Amontillado! And I must satisfy them. Amontillado! As you are engaged, I am on my way to Lucrezi. If anyone has a critical turn, it is he. He will tell me, Lucrezi cannot tell Amontillado from sherry. And yet some fools will have it that his taste is a match for your own. Come, let us go. Whither? To your vaults. My friend, no, I will not impose upon your good nature. I perceive you have an engagement. Lucrezi, I have no engagement. Come on. So he's conned Fortunato into following him. Like, Fortunato's like, let's go to your vaults. Let's check it out. I'll tell you whether it's Amontillado. And our narrator, who we don't know his name, is just like, oh, no. I couldn't bother you. And drunk Fortunato is like, oh, don't worry. Let's go. Let's take a trip. My friend, no, it is not the engagement, but the severe cold with which I perceive you are afflicted. The vaults are insufferably damp. They are encrusted with nitre, like a deposit that comes through the walls from water. Let us go, nevertheless. The cold is merely nothing. Amontillado! You must have been imposed upon. And as for Lucrezi, he cannot distinguish sherry from Amontillado. Thus speaking, Fortunato possessed himself of my arm, and putting on a mask of black silk and drawing a roquelaire closely about my person, I suffered him to hurry me to my palazzo, my plaza. There were no attendants at home. They had absconded, they had gone away, to make merry in honor of the time. He told me them that I had told them that I should not return until the morning, and had given them explicit orders not to stir from the house. He's not going to get caught doing what he's going to do to this buddy, Fortunato. These orders were sufficient, I well knew, to ensure their immediate disappearance, one and all, as soon as my back was turned. I took from their sconces 2 flambeaux, torches, and giving one to Fortunato, bowed him through several suites of rooms to the archway that led into the vaults. I passed down a long and winding staircase, requesting him to be cautious as he followed. We came at length to the foot of the descent, and stood together upon the damp ground of the catacombs of the Montresors. The gait of my friend was unsteady, because he's drunk, and the bells upon his cap jingled as he strode. The pipe, he said. It is farther on, said I, but observe the white web work which gleams from these cavern walls. He turned towards me and looked into my eyes with 2 filmy orbs that distilled the rheum of intoxication. He's like, what's up, buddy? Nitre, he asked at length. Nitre, I replied. How long have you had that cough? My poor friend found it impossible to reply for many minutes. Is nothing, he said at last. Come, I said with decision, we will go back. Your health is precious. You are rich, respected, admired, beloved. You are happy, as once I was. You are a man to be missed. For me, it is no matter. We will go back. You will be ill, and I cannot be responsible. Besides, there is Lucrezi. Enough, said Fortunato. The cough's nothing. It will not kill me. I shall not die of a cough. True, I replied, and indeed I had no intention of alarming you unnecessarily, but you should use all proper caution. A draught of this medoc will defend us from the damps. Here, I knocked off the neck of a bottle, which I drew from a long row of its fellows that lay upon the mold. So he pulls a wine bottle from his own cellar and pops it off, says, Here, have a drink, this'll help. Drink, I said, presenting him with the wine. He raised it to his lips with a leer, paused, and nodded to me familiarly, while his bells jingled. I drink, he said, to the buried that repose around us, the people who are dead and buried down here in this cellar, and I to your long life. He again took my arm, and we proceeded. These vaults, he said, are extensive. The Montresors, I replied, were a great and numerous family. I forget your arms, like a coat of arms, like families that have distinctive last names. It's called heraldry, that they'll have a coat of arms. A human foot Dior and a field of azure. The foot crushes a serpent rampant, whose fangs are embedded in the heel. And the motto? Nemo mi impune lacessit. Good, he said. Let's take a second here and look at the definition of the narrator's coat of arms. It means no one attacks me with impunity. No one attacks me and gets away with it without punishment, in other words. That's what this narrator's family motto is. Very appropriate. Good, he said. The wine sparkled in his eyes and the bells jingled. My own fancy grew warm with the medak, the wine they're drinking. We had passed through long walls of piled skeletons, with casks and puncheons intermingling, into the inmost recesses of the catacombs. I paused again, and this time I made bold to seize Fortunato by an arm above the elbow. The nitre, I said. See, it increases. It hangs like moss upon the vaults. We are below the river's bed. The drops of moisture trickle among the bones. Come, we'll go back before it's too late. Your cough. It's nothing, he said. Let us go on, but first, another draught of the medak. I broke and reached him a flagon of de Grave, the grave. He emptied it at a breath. His eyes flashed with a fierce light. He laughed and threw the bottle upwards with a gesticulation of a hand gesture I did not understand. I looked at him in surprise. He repeated the movement, a grotesque one. You do not comprehend? He said. Not I replied. Then you are not of the Brotherhood? How? You are not of the Masons? Yes, I said. Yes. You? Impossible. A Mason? A Mason, I replied. A sign, he said. A sign. It is this, I answered, producing from beneath the folds of my roquelaire a trowel, like when you scrape bricks when you're laying bricks. Use a trowel. You jest, he exclaimed, recoiling a few paces. So this Fortunato is part of a secret brotherhood known as the Masons. And our narrator says, oh, yeah, I'm part of the Masons. And he pulls out a trowel. See? And Fortunato's like, oh, nice joke. Okay. But let us proceed to the Amontillado. Be it so, I said, replacing the tool beneath the cloak and again offering him my arm. He leaned upon it heavily. We continued our route in search of the Amontillado. We passed through a range of low arches, descended, passed on, and descending again, arrived at a deep crypt in which the foulness of the air caused our flambeau rather to glow than flame. At the most remote end of the crypt there appeared another less spacious. Its walls had been lined with human remains, piled to the vault overhead in the fashion of the great catacombs of Paris. 3 sides of this interior crypt were still ornamented in this manner. From the 4th side, the bones had been thrown down and lay promiscuously upon the earth, forming at one point a mound of some size. Within the wall thus exposed by the displacing of the bones, we perceived a still interior crypt or recess, in depth about 4 feet and in width about 3, in height about 6 or 7. It seemed to have been constructed for no special use within itself, but formed merely the interval between 2 of the colossal supports of the roof of the catacombs, and was backed by one of their circumscribing walls of solid granite. The catacombs of Paris are quite awesome. If you have, I've never been there. I've been to Paris once, but these were made centuries ago and are designed and made of human remains and human bones, and they're underneath the city streets of Paris. So this is kind of like where they're going through. I also envision for you gamers out there, this is sort of reminds me of a level in Dark Souls where they're going down into the depths. It was in vain that Fortunato, uplifting his dull torch, endeavored to pry into the depth of the recess. Its termination, the feeble light did not enable us to see. In other words, he tried to look in there and couldn't see the inside of it. It's too dark. Proceed, I said. Herein is the Amontillado. As for Lucchese, he's an ignoramus. interrupted my friend as he stepped unsteadily forward, while I followed immediately at his heels. In niche and in finding an instant, he had reached the extremity of the niche, and finding his progress arrested by the rock, stood stupidly and bewildered. He went in and he sees a wall in front of him and stops. Like, what? A moment more, I had fettered him into the granite. To fetter means to chain. He reached forward and chained him to the wall. In its surface were two iron staples, distant from each other about 2 feet horizontally. From one of these depended a short chain, from the other a padlock. Throwing the links about his waist, it was but the work of a few seconds to secure it. He was too much astounded to resist. Withdrawing the key, I stepped back from the recess. "Pass your hand," I said, "over the wall. You cannot help feeling the nitre. Indeed, it is very damp. Once more, let me implore you return. No? Then I must positively leave you. But I must first render you all the little attentions in my power." "The Amontillado!" ejaculated my friend, not yet recovered from his astonishment. "True," I replied, "the Amontillado." As I said these words, I buried myself among the pile of bones of which I have before I busied myself among the pile of bones of which I had before spoken. Throwing them aside, I soon uncovered a quantity of building stone and mortar. With these materials, and with the aid of my trowel, I began vigorously to wall up the entrance of the niche. I had scarcely laid the first row of masonry, when I discovered that the intoxication of Fortunato had in great measure worn off. The earliest indication I had of this was a low, moaning cry from the depth of the recess. It was not the cry of a drunken man. There was then a long and obstinate, stubborn silence. I laid the second tier, and the third, and the fourth, and then I heard the furious vibrations of the chain. The noise lasted several minutes, during which, that I might hearken to it with the more satisfaction, I ceased my labors and sat down upon the bones. In other words, he hears it, he stops, and he takes a moment to enjoy the sounds of the chains. When at last the clanking subsided, I resumed the trowel and finished without interruption the fifth, the sixth, and the seventh tier. The wall was now nearly upon the level with my breast. I again paused, and holding the flambeau, the torch, over the mason work, threw a few feeble rays upon the figure within. A succession of loud and shrill screams, bursting suddenly from the throat of the chained form, seemed to thrust me violently back. For a brief moment I hesitated. I trembled. Unsheathing my rapier, my sword, I began to grope with it about the recess. But the thought of an instant reassured me. I placed my hand upon the solid fabric of the catacombs and felt satisfied. I reapproached the wall. I replied to the yells of him who clamored. I re-echoed. I aided. I surpassed them in volume and in strength. I did this, and the clamor grew still. In other words, whatever Fortunato was yelling from inside his now tomb, the narrator would repeat back to him and make fun of him. Ah, help me, help me. I shouldn't be laughing. Well, no, maybe I should. It's pretty funny. It was now midnight, and my task was drawing to a close. I had completed the 8th, the 9th, and the 10th tier. I had finished a portion of the last and the 11th. There remained but a single stone to be fitted and plastered in. I struggled with its weight. I placed it partially in its destined position, but now there came from out of the niche a low laugh that erected the hairs upon my head. It was succeeded by a sad voice, which I had difficulty in recognizing as that of the noble Fortunato. The voice said, "A very good joke indeed. An excellent jest. We will have many a rich laugh about it at the palazzo, over our wine." "The Amontillado," I said. "Yes, the Amontillado. But is it not getting late? Will they not be awaiting us at the palazzo, the Lady Fortunato and the rest? Let us be gone." "Yes," I said, "let us be gone." "For the love of God, Montresor!" "Yes," I said, "for the love of God." But to these words I hearkened in vain for a reply. I grew impatient. I called aloud, "Fortunato!" No answer. I called again, "Fortunato!" No answer still. I thrust a torch through the remaining aperture and let it fall within. There came forth in return only a jingling of the bells. My heart grew sick. It was the dampness of the catacomb that made it so, not the fact that he's murdering his friend. I hastened to make an end of my labor. I forced the last stone into its position. I plastered it up. Against the new masonry, I re-erected the old rampart of bones. For the half of a century, no mortal has disturbed them. In pace requiescat. Rest in peace.